Welcome to dot point A1, and today we're going to look at comparing the similarities and differences in the physiology of ruminant and monogastric digestion. So what we need to look at here is showing the physiology. Physiology just means function. So if you can write off here the function of the ruminant and monogastric digestion system, so we need to know the difference between how they function. Now you should already know from year 11 how they are different in structure, but this is about the function. So it's kind of already assumed that you know about the structure, and I actually put the structure here, the structure difference. So we have, here's an example of a monogastric or a chicken. Now the chicken's a bit of an interesting example. It has a crop, a proventriculus, and a gizzard, but it's considered one stomach. It has a monogastric, meaning one stomach. And this is the stomach. Then you have small intestine, large intestine, and a cecum, which allows it to digest some plant materials. It also has an esophagus, which all animals do. We also have here the horse, and a horse also is a monogastric. And you can see again the esophagus, the stomach, and again a horse, a monogastric, has one stomach. It has a small intestine, then a large intestine. Now, the horse is what we call a hindgut fermenter, which means behind its gut or its stomach and small intestines, behind those places is the cecum, and the cecum allows the horse to digest plant material. We don't have a large cecum, so we cannot digest plant material and cellulose in the same way as a horse can. But the horse doesn't really digest that stuff, plant material, stuff that's high in cellulose in its stomach. It digests it in its cecum. Whereas when we move on to the ruminant, this is a cow, or could be a sheep. It's exactly the same. We have the esophagus, of course, and then we also have the rumen first, then the reticulum, the omasum, and the abomasum. Now, this is sometimes referred to as four stomachs, sometimes referred to as one stomach with four chambers or four compartments. Either way, there's four parts to this stomach. Or the stomach area of the ruminant. So the first one that it kind of comes to is the rumen, and the rumen is the largest, and it's can be up to 150 litres in cows, and you can imagine how big that is if you think about 2 or 3 litre milk bottles and think about multiplying that by 50 or 75. It's very large. The reticulum is basically part of the rumen. It actually, if you look inside and you cut open a rumen reticulum, you'll notice the wall of the reticulum is very different to the wall of the rumen, which you'll see if you when you do a dissection. But they're basically almost indistinguishable apart from the wall. They have the similar function as well, and remember there's microbe action in here, which we'll look at shortly. The third compartment is the omasum, and the last compartment is the abomasum, and you should remember hopefully that the abomasum is most similar to a monogastric stomach because it has glandular digestion with enzymes breaking things down in there that are produced by glands. It also has acid that breaks down and digests the microbes that have come through here, the stomach, and made it to the abomasum. They get killed and digested as protein in the abomasum, whereas there's microbes in here fermenting carbohydrates and protein. And then of course they have a small intestine, a cecum, and a large intestine, just like all the other animals above, which are monogastrics. Sometimes you get asked about duodenum, which is like the exit of the stomach before the small intestine, which is kind of this area here. I haven't labeled it, but it'd be good to label the duodenum because it's a question that comes up later anyway. All right, so let's look at function of these parts, the difference in function. So first of all, enzymes begin chemical breakdown of starch and physical breakdown as well, and that is something that's going to happen in the monogastric. This side is a monogastric, and you've got enzymes breaking down the food in the mouth there, and also physical breakdown. Over here we have the same thing. Basically, we have saliva and chewing of the food in a ruminant. When we move on to the stomachs though, they're quite different. The stomach here, the monogastric has hydrochloric acid and enzymes in its stomach. And the acid means that the acidity, the pH, is very low. It's around about 2 or 3 in the monogastric stomach in humans, in pigs, in horses. And that helps break the food apart into smaller parts, carbs into simple sugars, and proteins into amino acids. So in a way, the monogastric digestive system is very simple, very straightforward, and not very complex. And it takes in very high quality, good, dense in nutrients type of food, and it just breaks it apart and just gets digested. And those things, the digestion is completed by the time it gets to the small intestine. The glucose, lipids, amino acids are just absorbed into the blood, and then the large intestine just removes water from the residue, and it's quite straightforward. And so this system, the monogastric system, doesn't actually require as much energy to keep it running. It doesn't produce as much heat waste because it's just not a super complex procedure compared to the ruminant. So if we look at the ruminant, we have the 4 compartments of the stomach: the rumen, reticulum, omasum, abomasum. And firstly, there's lots of microbes, like millions, billions of microbes, which are bacteria mainly, and also protozoa and fungi. And those microbes actually secrete enzymes which digest carbohydrates. Those enzymes break down the food, and the microbes then re-eat a lot of the things that the enzymes break down, and the microbes grow, and that happens in the rumen. The reticulum is basically similar to the rumen, and it's called the paunch together. So the rumen and reticulum together is called the paunch, and the stuff moves back and forward between them. And then the stuff that's at the top of the rumen, that is not very well digested, not very well broken down, is kind of fibery. It gets sent back up, and it's called regurgitation or chewing of the cud, where the ruminant ruminates, and it just sends this undigested food back up to the mouth to get chewed again, and it comes back. It sends a bolus or a ball of food up to get re-chewed. Then we move down to the omasum, and the omasum, sometimes termed the Bible. It has a lot of muscular folds, and the muscular folds kind of increase the surface area. That's why there's so many pages or leaves in the book, the Bible it's called. And the muscles in the omasum like squeeze the fluid and water out of the food that's passing through and reabsorb it into the blood, and that helps the animals live in very dry conditions, and they maximize the water that they get out of their feed, and they don't leave any water and lose any water. As you notice by sheep droppings, they're very dry. The last compartment of the stomach, we have the abomasum, and this is considered the true stomach because it's most like ours. It's most like the monogastric. You have gastric juices secreted. Hydrochloric acid kills microbes, and they're digested as protein, and that's basically the same. Being gastric juices and hydrochloric acid, it's the same as the stomach of a monogastric over here. The small intestine in a ruminant is a bit different to a small intestine in a monogastric because it is still breaking down starch, fats, and protein into soluble compounds which get absorbed into the blood. And then lastly, there's still some further digestion occurring by intestinal bacteria and water removed in the ruminant large intestine, which isn't happening in the monogastric. All right, so looking at similarities and differences. Now, both of them have small and large intestines. They both digest food and produce waste. Monogastric stomach and abomasum both have hydrochloric acid and enzymes. They both use physical and chemical digestion at different stages, and they have a similar structure and order. However, these are the differences. So the monogastric has faster digestion. It's much simpler, as I said before. The enzymes and chemical digestion in saliva occurs. We have one stomach compartment. They can't really digest cellulose very well, although things such as horses, which are hindgut fermenters, can digest cellulose in their cecum, which we saw here. They can digest cellulose here, but other monogastrics, humans, for example, can't really do that. But they can't digest quite as much cellulose as ruminants. They usually have around about a 2-to-1 food conversion ratio, so they require about 2 kilos of food to give them 1 kilo of weight gain. They're more efficient for that reason. They use less energy to actually do the digestive process. The enzyme pepsin digests protein in the monogastric. There's no microbes in the stomach due to the acid, and small intestine reabsorbs water. The difference in the function of the ruminant is microbes digest the food, you're often through secreting enzymes which do the actual breaking down, but the microbes reabsorb or eat the remains of that process. They have 4 stomach compartments. They can easily digest cellulose. They have more like a 5 to 8 to 1 FCR, food conversion ratio, where they need about 5 or 8 kilos of food just to produce 1 kilo of weight gain. They're also less efficient due to this because the loss of heat, the methane and carbon dioxide that are produced as well means they lose a lot more energy and they're a lot less efficient. They can, however, upgrade low quality food, and this means producing vitamins B and K from their food. They don't have to have those vitamins in their feed. They can actually produce them. The microbes in their stomach can produce them, and that can't happen over with the monogastric. They have a neutral pH in their rumen to allow the microbes to exist, and they can provide protein from non-protein sources. So they can turn non-protein sources into protein because the microbes grow and are digested. Okay, they also chew their cud and send the food back up to their mouth to be chewed again, which monogastrics do not do. Just quickly, we need to look at the breakdown of protein compared to the breakdown of carbohydrates. And with monogastrics, this is fairly straightforward. So mouth and saliva begin breakdown of protein. Pepsin and gastric juices help break down protein in the stomach. Enzymes in pancreatic juices break them into amino acids, and the amino acids are absorbed into the bloodstream through the small intestine wall. It's fairly straightforward. You need to remember this. With a ruminant, it's a little bit more complex. There's a few steps. So protein can be broken down into amino acids by microbes. Ammonia is then produced and absorbed. Sometimes some of it goes to the liver and is changed to urea, and some is excreted as urine. Some of it's reabsorbed back into the rumen, and microbes can actually eat this urea and they build microbial protein. And so what happens with these microbes, they then go on to the abomasum where the microbes themselves get digested and are a form of protein. And then lastly, any other protein that hasn't been digested by this stage passes to the small intestine and it gets broken down into amino acids. Moving on to carbohydrates, it's fairly simple again with monogastrics. Enzymes in pancreatic juice break down the carbs into simple sugars and they're absorbed into the bloodstream through the small intestine. Very straightforward. The ruminant, meanwhile, the place where we get carbohydrates are grains. So there's a lot in grains: cellulose, starch, sugar. Mature pasture is high in cellulose, and starch is high in cereals and grains. And so there's basically 2 stages here. The first one is complex carbohydrates are digested into simple sugars by enzymes, which are secreted by microbes. And then the microbes then eat the sugars, which were broken down by the enzymes, and they turn that into volatile fatty acids, which are like the main energy source here for a ruminant. The volatile fatty acids produced by the breakdown of carbohydrates. The names of them are butyric, propionic, and ethanoic, and they're absorbed into the blood and used as energy. However, one of the wastes of this process is a lot of carbon dioxide and a lot of methane. And methane is a large issue, methane emissions from cows. It is a large percentage of kind of greenhouse gases in the world. And so if we can solve that and reduce that, it would be very good. All right, so which organ in the ruminant digestive system functions in a way that most closely resembles the functioning of the stomach of the monogastric? And that's the abomasum, as I've said a few times. Describe the differences between the monogastric animals and ruminant animals in terms of digestion of protein and carbohydrate. Now, what I've done is I've gone on the website, the Standards Authority, New South Wales Education Standards Authority website, to look for the past HSC marking scheme. And this here that I've put in the middle here is just quite simply a sample answer for this question that the markers at the HSC wrote as a sample. Now, what a sample answer is it's like the minimum kind of basic structure that you require to get full marks for the question. So you should get, if you wrote this, you should have gotten 6 for this answer. And basically, it's not the only way of answering the question. There's many, many ways of answering a question, but it gives you an idea of just the minimum things, the basic things that you need to get full marks there. So you can have a read of that by pausing. Moving on. What is the major difference between the digestive processes in ruminants and monogastric animals? Monogastric animals do not require roughage in their diet. Ruminant animals are able to synthesize B group vitamins. Monogastric animals use their own enzymes in the process of digestion. Ruminant animals are able to convert some amino acids into other amino acids. The answer is B there for the 2013 question. The 2012 question, ruminant animals can achieve high growth rates on a diet consisting only of low quality protein. So the key here is only low quality protein and high growth rates. The features of rumen microbes that allow this to occur are the ability to digest cellulose. It can do that. Synthesize amino acids. It can do that. Produce B group vitamins. It can do that. And synthesize volatile fatty acids. It can't. It doesn't make them. It doesn't create them out of nothing. So that's not right, but these three are all correct, are all right. But the best answer here is it's asking about high growth rates, even with having low quality protein. And clearly you need enough protein to have enough muscle growth and growth rate. And so here, digesting cellulose is not really relevant. Synthesizing or creating amino acids is the most relevant to the question because of the bit about protein. This question here, why do pigs produce less methane than cattle or sheep? Firstly, you need to identify that pigs are monogastrics, cattle and sheep are ruminants. Rumination and fermentation of carbohydrates by microbes in the rumen reticulum produces a large amount of methane as a byproduct. And since pigs do not do this, enzyme digestion in the stomach occurs in pigs. They do not produce as much methane. So that's well and truly answering the question for 3. So you need to definitely identify that pigs are monogastrics and that cattle, sheep are ruminants. You need to talk about rumination, about the microbes and the byproduct of carbohydrate breakdown being methane. Here for this page, compare the physiology of monogastric digestion and ruminant digestion. Again, for 6 marks, I've shown you the sample answer from the marking scheme. So the markers that marked the HSC wrote this as an example of the minimum that you could put to get the full marks. So this is kind of what they wrote. A table format for this kind of thing for a compare is okay. This question here, describe a feature of cattle that enables them to use hay as a feed source. You need to talk about microbes because hay, you need to say that hay is high in cellulose. Therefore, cattle are ruminants, and because they have microbes that can break down cellulose well, that means they can ferment the cellulose and turn it into some kind of energy, and that's only 2 marks, so that's a good answer there. Okay, lastly, the last page. This is from a while ago, 2002, but the diagrams represent digestive tract of a monogastric animal and ruminant. Here we have a monogastric, here we have a ruminant, and asks you to label cecum, duodenum, large intestine, and esophagus. The esophagus is up here, just coming from the mouth. The duodenum is the part that comes out of the stomachs, which is here. The large intestine is here and here on this animal, and the cecum are here. They're the large kind of dead end organs that you see here sticking out. And the last question, explain one similarity and one difference in the way monogastric animals and ruminant animals digest protein. So you don't need to worry about carbohydrates, just protein, and you need to show cause and effect, one similarity and one difference. So before I wrote anything else, I wrote similarity and I wrote difference so that I remember that I have to do both. Okay, so both for similarity, both mono and ruminants absorb amino acids in the small intestine once they're broken down. And lastly, the difference, ruminants continue the breakdown of protein into amino acids in the small intestine, whereas monogastrics do not do any further breakdown in the small intestine. There's a few things you could talk about with this. They're just the 2 that I chose, but you could also talk about the breakdown of protein in the rumen compared to the breakdown of protein in the stomach. I kind of chose to talk about the later stages of digestion that weren't in the stomach, but you could easily and equally do the same thing in the stomach. And the difference up here in protein breakdown here compared to here, and how it goes out into urea, comes back in and can be absorbed and created, protein created by the microbes. So that is the answers to A1 dot point.